Welcome to today's show of Marketing Innovators Podcast. Today we have Philip Hatcher, who is the Director of Marketing at Sprout. Sprout is a health technology company that empowers organizations to embrace well-being and improve the health and happiness of every user. Designed for employers and consumer brands, Sprout helps every user build healthy habits to improve their health and wellness. Philip, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So thank you for coming by today because, I really was excited to hear about your background as well as how you're helping Sprout grow. And if you can give us a little bit about your backstory as far as, how you ended up in this role and what Sprout is about, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of my backstory. I've kind of jumped into the startup world pretty early in my career. So out of grad school, had the opportunity to join a very early stage startup as actually their first full-time employee alongside one of the founders. So early on, got a chance to wear a number of different hats, which gave me a chance to learn what I liked, what I didn't like, and really kind of set me on the track of that marketing, product sales roles that followed. So I've worked with multi-sport games with Pan Am Games, national nonprofits with Participation, a number of different startups, and even a short dabble in consulting as well on the side.
Wow. So I was kind of going through the profile of Sprout, and it's really interesting what you guys do over there. Can you talk a little bit about the health API and also what is it that makes Sprout unique?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sprout has been around as a workplace wellness solution for over a decade. So has been serving employers with helping their employees get healthy, get active. And in that time has built up a pretty robust feature set and service offering, which during the pandemic in that time gave us the opportunity to almost take a step back, revisit what we had offered, but also to start looking at other organizations who were reaching out for some of these particular features. And what that did was it created the opportunity to create the Open Health API, which is really the feature set from Sprout at Work available to any organization. So things like health risk assessments, the ability to connect multiple wearable devices, full content libraries with a full ML model in the back end for content delivery and personalization. So a lot of these things that were really, really valuable to the employers almost transitioned to now having customers in telehealth, finance, healthcare, insurance, loyalty, and really a broad spectrum and expanding the product out for the API.
So for those of us who don't understand how it all works, how do you actually work with some of these clients to deliver the technology that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So API, for those not familiar, is just application programming interface. And really what it does is it allows you to connect to the features or to the tools that we offer and add them to your existing platforms at a much lower cost and effort than if you were to go to build them yourself. So for example, with our health risk assessment, which is one of the world's only real-time health risk assessments, you can connect to our API endpoints to add that feature to your app without having to go build the whole thing. And then you have the ability as the customer to render that to your customers in whatever way you want. So you get to maintain that look and feel with the guidance from our team, from our technical team and product team on helping you get it to that right state, but making sure that it still fits the brand and fits the business for you on your end as well. So it allows you to really cost effectively add new features, but more importantly is the data that you can collect from that. So it allows you to pull in new data sources from health, wellness, lifestyle, behavioral data from your users using new features.
Okay. So, this is really interesting because, Sprout, I think, has a very unique presence in terms of, the offering that it actually has to offer to its clients. But, how do you communicate that to your target audience and who, based on the target audience, what kind of marketing works well?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, like everyone else, it's been a heavy switch to digital in the last 18 months. What we've found is there are a lot of conversations happening in the marketplace, not specifically looking for API endpoints for health data or API endpoints for features, but more organizations that are experiencing challenge around customer experience, challenges around personalization, challenges around brand loyalty and product loyalty. When we look at retail example, we have a number of organizations interested in that because retail has become so digital so quickly that your customer experience is that entire experience. There's very little now for a lot of organizations in the in-store experience. So now they're focused on how can we add that extra layer of stickiness to that online shopping? How can we add additional functionality and features to our shopping applications or to our grocery applications or whatever else to not only collect information from a user, but really add value and support an individual user? So taking things like a health risk assessment is a good example. If you offer that to all of your consumers, but you then follow up with, here are healthy choices for grocery shopping, or here are promotions for products that may be of interest to you, you're essentially using the health data that individuals are collecting every day on their wearable devices like their Garmin, Fitbit, or Apple watches, and you're helping them use that in a functional way.
Mm. Do you feel that you have to work through some privacy barriers here to make sure that you're actually getting the right kind of data?
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to wearable device data, it's a bit of a separate conversation because you're connecting directly to these wearable devices that individuals are setting up. So making sure, obviously, the T's and C's are outlined for the user in terms of what they're sharing. And we are explicit and very transparent with the information that we collect. Even when you register on the platform, it's allowing you to accept or reject what information you would like to pass to the platform. Of course, when it comes to our customers, how they use that data, we provide advice and best practices on, but these are also the T's and C's of when you'd register for their product. You're registering on their end. So supporting them in building out the best use cases for customers and advising them and their legal counsels on industry standards and best practices.
It seems that there's a lot of education that has to go along with convincing your end customers to be able to use your platform as well, considering the capabilities that it has. When it comes to marketing, are you using some sort of ways on how you can actually educate your audience and build rapport that way?
Absolutely, and it is a bit longer of a sales cycle in this B2B model because you're not just necessarily providing a single solution like someone looking for a CRM. Okay, here's your CRM. It's educating them on the value of the product over time and the implementation kind of considerations for it. So for us, content marketing is a huge piece, educating them on some of the use cases and examples of how they could use it and customizing this as much as possible to each of these individual industries, making sure that the example you use for insurance is very different than the one you'd use for retail, and making sure you tell that story to them so they understand the value that it could bring to their organization. But at the same time, making sure you're telling a different story to someone in a technical role than you would in a marketing role. So for us, personalization on that content delivery is key, which is really I'll say a growing piece for us because we've only launched this product in May of this year. So it is very new. So launching that product allowed us to really dive into the data as much as possible and continue to learn from what's working, what's not working, that kind of fail fast, fail cheap mentality from the content marketing perspective and targeting.
So, content marketing is a very vast topic. There are so many different ways to utilize content and leverage it online. Obviously, a lot has to play in terms of, if you're creating good quality content, then, Google, you get some Google brownie points as well. How are you actually utilizing some of the content marketing? And obviously, are you noticing some trends as far as what exactly is working and what is not, perhaps?
Yeah, I'd say that's a continuous learning experience for every marketer right now. Where we've seen the most success is on the targeted campaigns. So less of that general top of funnel. Of course, you're going to get interest, but it's usually more kind of casual browsing that it is targeted opportunities. But for us, focusing the conversation through the funnel, understanding that sales journey so you know as well as possible what to deliver at what stage, whether you're top, middle, or bottom of funnel, and making sure it's as personalized as possible to them. Content marketing is, obviously there's a lot of competition. Content marketing is done by almost every organization. And in the B2B space now, there's a bit of a bottleneck in terms of, how many white papers and ebooks can you really read? So making it as pinpoint and specific as possible is so key, especially when you're looking at talking to decision makers. They're not out for a casual read. They're looking for something that's going to add value, especially when you're targeting them in that work environment. So
Mm.
personalization is continuously our focus, and trying to learn on what content's working at what stage throughout the journey. When you look at customers who have converted, at what stage are they converting, or are they consuming each piece of content? What stuff drives the most kind of relevant conversations? It helps identify, one, what's resonating with that group. So if you're talking about 5 different topics in the insurance space, but these 3 seem to be hitting home runs for driving people through the funnel, then obviously you're going to put more focus on, why do these work? How can we replicate or create additional pieces that support this storyline here?
Mm. So, obviously gathering all this data is really key so that you can evaluate the customer journey. However, depending on the content that you're actually putting out there, are you utilizing any platforms that you think work better than others that you found useful in evaluating what that customer journey looks like?
Yeah, for sure. So we're hubbed on HubSpot. So our base is HubSpot from web and content marketing side of the business. I would say what we've done in the last year is adding in data enrichment platforms and ABM tools to help support that conversation, especially from the ABM side, where starting the conversations on a product that's so new to the market and so unique, where it isn't a single conversation that's necessarily going to help someone understand exactly what it is, has allowed us to target the right person with that right conversation. So when you're talking to finance, when you're talking to tech, when you're talking to marketing, giving them the story that's relevant to them. On the other side is the data enrichment. So when individuals are coming into the system, because everything's so digital, it's so form heavy when you're looking at data collection, is how do you make it as easy as possible for that individual to come in and not have to ask them questions you can get elsewhere? So once you know where someone works, you don't really need to ask them the size of their organization, because there are tools that will help you enrich that. You don't really have to ask them where they're located. You can usually get that information. Now, we're going to go through, I think, the great evolution when the third-party cookies and everything start to go away. But in the meantime, there's lots of ways to enrich the data to better understand the customer without having to ask them 1,000 questions. Any data enrichment, I think, addition to our stack has been the most valuable, because it's allowed us to quickly determine who's a good fit and who's not, who's browsing for content, and who's truly looking for a solution.
Hmm. So, based on some of these tactics that you're actually employing, what are maybe some of the biggest challenges that you're facing in terms of helping Sprout grow?
Yeah, I'd say for the new product, the biggest challenge is probably just understanding each of these new markets as they emerge. It's interesting for us because we went out of the gates with a couple of specific markets and have quickly pivoted based on which others have shown the most interest. For example, insurance. Insurance kind of came out of nowhere, and we have a lot of interest coming from that space. The ability to use health data to adjust premiums and to help with risk scoring for them and understanding customers. So I'd say the biggest challenges for us is staying nimble and
Hmm.
not stinking your stake too far in the ground in one direction, and making sure that we have the flexibility to have the conversations in different spaces. We obviously want to put together that go-to-market strategy in as much detail as possible, but you also want to make sure that you leave the room for flexibility when a new opportunity emerges to be able to have that conversation, because it's a relatively new product, but from what we're seeing, it's a bit industry agnostic. Like, we're seeing
Hmm.
really across the board organizations that are finding niche ways to fit it in. I mean, finance is probably one of the most interesting. You wouldn't think of a health tech integration into a finance platform, but the big focus in finance right now is on financial wealth and financial health overall. And when you look at what can you add to financial health, well, overall health and wellness. Individuals that are healthier, happier, ideally will have better success in the financial markets as well. So it's bringing it all together in a holistic way for finance, which is new and very interesting to us, but probably wouldn't have been our first guess going out of the gate.
Hmm. That's really interesting. So, you obviously deal with, the insurance agency, but also the financial industry as well. But, can you tell us a little bit more about some other applications like that you find it was an odd use of your technology?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't really find a ton of odd uses. It's almost
Hmm.
just surprising on how the product fits. And it's most often our health risk assessment. I mean, traditional health
Hmm.
risk assessments are 100 plus questions. They take hours to complete. They're done in a static form where you're just completing whether it be a print or an online survey, which is basically a long form evaluation of everything you do, what you eat, how active you are, family history, etc. And our system simplifies that process with 12 questions and then wearable device connections. So instead of you having to tell us how active you are, it just takes your device data that you have that you're carrying around with every day. So one, it gives you a more realistic and accurate measure, but two, it makes it easier for the user. You don't have to input 50 different pieces of information. And when we look at that use case for our telehealth customers, so the virtual care, which has obviously skyrocketed since the pandemic, we see the health risk assessments are a really valuable tool for them because it's taking something that would have had to happen in person in a doctor's office and putting it on the platform, which allows them one, faster onboarding, but also I think better real time true measures of health for an individual user.
Interesting. Interesting. So where do you see Sprout, going in the future?
Yeah, I mean, with our two products, we've heavily focused on both over the last year. I think we're seeing a strong growth on the API side, but understanding that really Sprout at Work, our workplace wellness solution, is it's our foundation, but it's also the almost the testing ground for all of the new features and functions that we build for the API. So in that use case, we have really a dedicated user base, dedicated customer base that we can add new features and functionality to and get real-time feedback on. And those features then over time become available and accessible through the API itself. So the focus for us is to continue to evolve the product, especially on the API side where the ease of implementation is the biggest piece of any API. How can you make the documentation as clear as possible? How can you make the tech as usable as possible with also making it flexible enough to meet these different use case scenarios and all these different verticals as well. So the focus for us is very much on product, but I think too, telling that story in a way that helps organizations who may not necessarily be considering this as the solution for them to understand the value that it could bring. So organizations who are struggling with customer engagement, that this could be a really valuable way to drive customer engagement that may be a little bit different than what they had thought of previously.
Hmm. And that's potentially a key gap that marketing could fulfill if you're able to produce, some information and assets that that industry can download or can access through your portals, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's been the biggest role of the marketing team, especially from a content perspective over the last few months since we've launched this, is finding creative ways to tell that story to each of those different verticals in a I think in a storybook way. So how can you deliver multiple pieces over time to help someone understand the full story? Because when you bombard someone with an API product, it's a very technical solution. So you need to make sure you're meeting someone where they are. They may not be familiar with the APIs. They may be a tech lead and an absolute rock star. So making sure that you understand who you're talking to and target that relevance is very, very important when you're talking about a tech solution like this. Because a
Hmm.
marketer on their end is probably going to be the one that loves it the most. When you think about if you're a retailer and now you suddenly have health and wellness data, that's a whole other layer of marketing data that you have, not just for targeting your customers for upsell, resell, cross sell, but also building out those data clusters and those personas from a prospect marketing perspective as well. So it's a I think a interesting topic when you talk to marketers because it fits so many different spaces.
Hmm. It's the marketer's job to make the tech, seem sexy, right? So you have to really dumb it down a little bit, and also make sure that you are able to speak in the vertical's language, right? That you're actually targeting.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. The language is so specific to every vertical. When you're talking to insurance, it's a member. When you're talking to finance, it's a client. And when you're talking to retail, it's a customer. And even those little nuances in copy make it resonate differently with a group because if you don't speak their language, you probably don't understand their challenges as well.
that's true. So you mentioned like telehealth has skyrocketed in the past little while. What about do you see any other big opportunities like that in other industries right now, or is it mainly focusing on telehealth at this stage?
I would say the three that we've seen a jump onto the radar in, I think, faster than we had anticipated would be telehealth, retail, and insurance. I think insurance is evolved, I think, quickly, very quickly in the last 18 months because of so much of what they did had to be digitized. And in organizations where I think digital transformation historically was a bit scary, I think they've
Mhm.
realized that they can actually move a little bit faster than they're used to. I think the same is true for healthcare. Where you look at telehealth in Canada and the US has gone from rarely used to very common in 18 months for doctor's appointments and checkups and things like that. And I think these organizations are looking at, okay, if we're going to be the future of the doctor visit, then what else do we need to add to this portfolio to give the best customer or the best user experience? And when we look at retail, we've seen retail really flip on its head with organizations that have been brick and mortar for so long are figured out quickly how to get to e-commerce. But at the same time, organizations that have for so long been e-commerce that have kind of invented the space are now in the pop-up shop brick and mortar space. So it's been an interesting evolution that's happened in that, where customer experience is at the core of all of those. And all of them struggle and will continue to struggle with how to build that perfect customer experience. But at the end of the day, it's how do you add more value to that individual user's life, not just with the product you're selling them, but overall. How do you
Mhm.
take how do you take the conversation from buying a policy or putting in a claim to create that conversation that fills that gap in the middle? And I think that's where the opportunity lies for tools like this, is it gives you a personal reason to have a continued relationship with a customer.
So true. So just to shift gears a little bit, Philip, I mean, if you were to go back 10 years, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Yeah, good question. Um, I would say continuing education and continuing learning. I think when I finished grad school, I think I felt a little bit kind of schooled out, where I wanted a bit of a break. But one thing I've noticed in the last few years, especially with the emergence of like the Coursera's and edX platforms, is there's so many things that you can add to your arsenal that are not even expensive to get. It's just the time commitment from yourselves. So for myself, and a big piece of what we do on the platform is behavioral cognitive behavioral science, game theory, behavioral economics, and finding information available on those is a lot more accessible than I think I realized before that. So I'd say 5 or 10 years ago, I would try and continue adding that in as a part of your kind of weekly planning, and all the other things that you add in from your fitness regimen to your grocery shopping, is spend some time on continuing the education, because no matter what industry you're in, it moves faster than you think.
Hmm. So it's interesting you mentioned, behavioral science, and I was actually looking at your background. So you obviously graduated from the University of Waterloo as an MBA, but you did your honors in psychology and behavioral neuroscience as well. So can you maybe shed some light on that as far as how that has actually helped you in your marketing?
Yeah, so I think it spurred my interest in the how and why decisions are being made early on. My focus when in university was around uh, so it was neuroscience and automaticity and reading, and I worked in research labs and things there, and it I think it made me pay more attention to not just what the outcome is, but why we got to that outcome, which I think is a really important part of marketing, where it's not just that you got someone to convert, it's why you got them to convert. What was it the right time, was it the right content, did you just get a bluebird and they just happened to be the right it just happened to be the right time for them? And making sure you, I think, ask as many questions as possible. I think psychology is also, while not maybe the most valuable undergrad on its own, I think it's the perfect undergrad for following on with additional education. So going to grad school, I think, was a good follow on for myself, because I wasn't going to work in psychology as a field. But I think it's a helpful thought starter as you move into business or you move into finance, to think that at the end of the day, you're not selling a business, you're selling a person on the other side of that. And it's an important thing to consider, that when you're having a conversation, it needs to be relevant to them as a person, not just for them as a business.
Mm. We have a lot of marketing professionals that listen to this podcast, trying to develop their careers and help the companies that they're a part of. So, based on your experience and the challenges that you have overcome, if there was one big key takeaway that you could give to our listeners, what would that be?
I would say all the time I've spent in the startup world, it's fail fast and fail cheap, but try it, because there's no silver bullet for what's going to solve that problem in marketing. You can't come in and say, okay, we're going to go with a referral program, or we're going to do programmatic advertising. Like, there's no one thing that's going to be a home run. And if you don't try, you'll never see where these pieces fit together. So I would say, even if it's a small test, is to try it, because if nothing else, you'll learn why it didn't work. And I think that's one of the things in launching a new product that we've learned is all of our campaigns are not home runs. But if you can launch 5 that you can learn from, that sixth one will have a lot more relevance to the customer that you're trying to hit than if you were to just go at the gates with all your gunpowder in one campaign, which is never the way to go.
Mm. It's interesting you mentioned that. And I think, when you talk about these campaigns and looking at the evaluation of what is working and what isn't working, it's the conversions that really impact the bottom line of any business, any company, right? And you don't have to, say the number, but unless you're comfortable. But what kind of conversion rates are you experiencing from some of the marketing that you're actually doing?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of calculations and conversions as we go through the funnel. I think the biggest one for us is understanding where our organic and direct, so understanding what that conversion rate is on web. And the important part of that is understanding how well your website's really educating that consumer. Because if your website is getting a ton of traffic and you have, forms and pop-ups and chatbots and all the fun things that we get to play with in marketing, but you're not getting that level of conversion, it's probably related to the story that you're telling. It doesn't mean the product's not the right fit for that group. It usually comes down to telling that right story. And that's where, the A/B testing and web optimizations, dynamic pages, all these great solutions exist to help solve that problem. And I would say on the other side is understanding the campaign conversion rates. I mean, we all know what your ballpark cost per acquisition should be if you're advertising on LinkedIn or if you're advertising on display or search. What's more important, though, is how many of those leads actually make it through the funnel, and understanding what else supported them in that journey. Because I think when you look at it at face value, picking this stream or picking the channel that has the lowest cost per acquisition seems like a smart move, except if you're bringing in a ton of low quality leads, it's not worth your spend, where it might be worthwhile to spend double elsewhere. So I think for us, it's not one area or one metric that we're looking at, but making sure that we continue to evaluate and optimize to make sure that each channel is performing adequately, but also that we're continuing to identify where and what we should be investing those dollars in, and optimizing continuously across all of the channels that we use.
Makes sense. Well, I mean, I think that obviously conversions are a huge aspect for any business, and there's no one channel that can actually promise you the best conversions. Obviously, it's a combination of things, and it's important to track the metrics as you go through some of these campaigns. So, Philip, where can the audience reach you online? What is the best way to connect with you? Is it via LinkedIn or through your website?
I would say the best way is probably through LinkedIn. If you're interested in learning more about Sprout, please check us out online at sproutatwork.com. I mean, there's a ton of info on there. Even if you're just interested in workplace wellness in general for your company, there's tons of valuable content and information on there to help you get started. But yeah, if you're looking to connect with me directly, LinkedIn's definitely the place to go.
Excellent. We'll definitely include the links to your LinkedIn profile as well as Sprout. And, that way the audience can learn a little bit more about your background as well as Sprout. So thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, it's been a pleasure to chat with you today and learn about your background as well as how you've helped Sprout grow. And I would say that, definitely keep in touch, and I wish you the best of success.